The quiet suburban town was supposed to be a fresh start for Kayla Johnson. At 16, she was bright, hardworking, and full of dreams. Her father, Marcus Johnson, had chosen this town hoping for a peaceful life for his daughter. A former Navy SEAL, Marcus believed in discipline, strength, and providing Kayla with every opportunity to succeed. But Kayla soon realized that being one of the few black students in her new school made her stand out in ways she didn't want. On her first day, Kayla walked into the school halls with her head held high. She smiled at the students she passed, hoping to make friends. But instead of warm greetings, she noticed the stares. Whispered comments followed her wherever she went. She tried to ignore them, brushing it off as first-day nerves, but the uneasy feeling in her chest wouldn't go away. In class, it didn't get better. When Kayla raised her hand to answer questions, some students rolled their eyes. At lunch, she sat alone while others grouped together, laughing and chatting. Still, Kayla told herself she'd push through. She was strong, like her father had taught her to be. One day after school, Kayla decided to take a shortcut home through a quiet alleyway. It was lined with old fences and overgrown bushes, and she often used it to avoid the crowded main streets. As she walked, she noticed a group of teenagers hanging out near the end of the alley. She recognized them from school. They were older boys, always loud and acting tough. Kayla thought about turning back, but she didn't want to seem scared. With her backpack slung over one shoulder, she walked past them confidently, keeping her eyes ahead. She could feel their stares, hear their low murmurs, but she ignored it. "Hey, you new around here?" one of them called out. His tone wasn't friendly. Kayla glanced over her shoulder, giving them a polite smile. "Yeah, I just moved here." The boy, Jake, stepped closer, his group following. "Where you from? You don't look like you belong here." Kayla's heart started to race. She wasn't sure what to say. "I just live a few blocks away," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. Jake smirked, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Well, maybe you should find another way home. This isn't your neighborhood." The other boys laughed, and Kayla felt her chest tighten. She turned to leave, but Jake's words echoed after her. "Watch yourself, new girl." Kayla quickened her pace, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack. When she got home, she locked the door behind her and let out a shaky breath. Her father wasn't home. He was away on a job, but she wished he was there. Marcus had always been her protector, her rock. That night, as Kayla lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She tried to tell herself it was just words, that she had nothing to worry about. But deep down, she knew the boys weren't done with her yet. Kayla's walk to school the next morning felt heavier than usual. The memory of Jake and his group lingered in her mind. She tried to shake it off, convincing herself it was just teenage boys trying to act tough. Still, her instincts told her to stay alert. The school day went on as usual, but Kayla couldn't help but notice how Jake and his friends seemed to be everywhere. She saw them laughing loudly near the lockers, pointing in her direction during lunch, and leaning against the walls in the hallways as if they owned the place. Their presence felt intentional, like they wanted her to know they were watching. "Don't let them get to you," Kayla muttered to herself during math class, keeping her focus on the teacher's voice. She thought about her father's advice. Stay strong. Never show fear. Marcus's words gave her strength, but she still felt uneasy. After school, Kayla took her usual route home, sticking to the busier streets. She didn't want to risk running into Jake or his group again. But as she approached the corner near her house, she noticed a figure leaning against the lamppost. It was Jake. His friends weren't far behind, casually sitting on a bench as if waiting for something or someone. Kayla's heart skipped a beat. She kept walking, hoping they wouldn't notice her. But Jake straightened up and stepped into her path, a smirk on his face. "Hey, new girl," he said, blocking her way. "Didn't we tell you this isn't your neighborhood?" Kayla tried to stay calm. "I don't want any trouble. I'm just trying to get home." Jake chuckled, his voice low. "Trouble? Who said anything about trouble? Kayla glanced around, noticing a few neighbors in their yards. She felt a little safer knowing people were nearby, but the tension in the air was thick. She stepped around Jake, ignoring his group's laughter as she hurried toward her house. When she finally reached her front door, Kayla exhaled deeply, her hands trembling slightly as she turned the key. Inside, she locked the door and leaned against it, trying to steady her breathing. Her father still wasn't home, but she wished more than anything that he was. Over the next few days, the tension grew. Jake and his friends always seemed to show up wherever Kayla was. At school, on her walk home, even near her favorite spot in the park. They didn't say much, but their stares and smirks were enough to make her feel unwelcome. Kayla didn't tell anyone, not even her father when they spoke on the phone. Marcus was still away on a Navy-related mission, and she didn't want to worry him. But deep down, she felt alone and unsure of what to do. One evening, as Kayla sat in her room staring at her homework, she heard footsteps outside her window. She froze, her heart pounding. Slowly, she peeked out the curtain but saw nothing in the darkness. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the silence. It was a text from an unknown number. "See you tomorrow, new girl." Kayla's stomach dropped. She didn't recognize the number, but she knew who it was from. The unease she had been pushing aside now felt like a storm growing on the horizon. Something was about to happen, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could handle it on her own. Kayla woke up the next morning with a heavy weight in her chest. She replayed the text from the night before in her mind. "See you tomorrow, new girl." It wasn't just a message. It felt like a warning. She had barely slept, her ears tuned to every creak of the house, every rustle outside her window. She considered staying home from school, but she quickly dismissed the thought. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Face your fears head-on, Kayla. Never let anyone make you feel small." Those words had guided her through tough times before, and they gave her strength now. As she walked into the school building, Kayla's heart pounded, but she kept her head high. She knew Jake and his group would be watching. Sure enough, she spotted them leaning against the lockers, their laughter loud and deliberate. Jake caught her eye and gave her a mocking grin, but Kayla didn't look away this time. She stared back, her expression calm and steady. Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting her reaction. "Morning, new girl," he said as she walked past. His friend snickered, but Kayla didn't stop. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. The day dragged on, the tension building with every passing hour. By lunchtime, Kayla could barely eat. Her appetite was gone, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. She tried to focus on her schoolwork, but her thoughts kept drifting to the text and what Jake might be planning. After the final bell rang, Kayla packed her things and hesitated before leaving the classroom. She debated taking the longer route home, the one with more people and open spaces, but something in her told her to take the usual path. She couldn't let Jake and his group control her choices. As she walked through the quiet streets, Kayla stayed alert, her senses heightened. She turned the corner into the alleyway and stopped in her tracks. Jake and his group were waiting, their postures casual but their eyes locked on her. Well, Jake said, stepping forward. "Looks like you didn't take our advice." Kayla's heart raced, but she clenched her fists and stood her ground. "I don't need advice from you." Jake's smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by surprise. The boys behind him exchanged glances, clearly not expecting her defiance. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," Jake said, his tone mocking. "But guts don't mean much around here." Kayla's voice didn't waver. "You can try to scare me, but it won't work. I'm not going anywhere." The boys laughed, but Jake's expression grew more serious. "You've got a big mouth for someone new." Kayla stayed silent, her gaze steady. Inside, she was terrified, but she refused to show it. Before Jake could step closer, a distant sound broke the tension. The roar of an engine. The group turned to see a black SUV speeding down the street toward them. Kayla's pulse quickened as the vehicle skidded to a stop nearby. The door swung open, and out stepped her father, Marcus Johnson. His tall, commanding figure and intense gaze made Jake and his friends freeze. Marcus looked at Kayla first, his eyes soft with concern, then turned to the group, his expression hardening. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Jake and his group hesitated, their bravado fading. Kayla felt a wave of relief wash over her. Her father was here, and she knew everything was about to change. The silence in the alley was heavy as Marcus Johnson stepped out of the black SUV. His presence was commanding, every movement deliberate and precise. Wearing a plain black jacket and jeans, he didn't look much different from any other parent, but his intense gaze and the air of authority around him were unmistakable. Jake and his group froze, their casual smirks wiped off their faces. They exchanged uneasy glances, clearly caught off guard by the sudden appearance of Kayla's father. Marcus's eyes scanned the scene quickly, landing on Kayla. His expression softened, his concern for her evident. "You okay, Kayla?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Kayla nodded, though her heart was still pounding. "I'm fine, Dad." Marcus turned his attention to Jake and his friends. His calm demeanor didn't waver, but his tone became sharper. "Now, what's going on here?" Jake hesitated, his confidence faltering under Marcus's piercing stare. "We were just talking," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Talking? Is that what this is?" The boys shifted uncomfortably, their bravado shrinking under Marcus's scrutiny. Jake opened his mouth to speak, but Marcus took a step closer, his tall frame casting a shadow over the group. "Let me be clear," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "You don't talk to my daughter unless she wants you to. And you definitely don't follow her around. Do you understand?" Jake nodded quickly, his usual smugness nowhere to be found. "Yeah, we get it." "Good," Marcus said, his gaze not leaving them. "Because if I hear about you bothering her again, we'll have a much more serious conversation. And trust me, you don't want that." The tension in the air was thick, but the boys didn't argue. One of them mumbled something about needing to leave, and the group quickly backed away, disappearing down the alley without another word. Marcus watched them go, his posture still tense, before turning back to Kayla. His expression softened again, and he stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you sure you're okay?" Kayla nodded, the fear that had been building inside her finally beginning to fade. "I'm fine now. I didn't know what to do." Marcus sighed, his protective instincts kicking in. "You did the right thing. You stood your ground, but you didn't put yourself in more danger. I'm proud of you." Kayla's eyes welled up with tears, and she quickly wiped them away. "I didn't tell you earlier because I didn't want to distract you. You were busy." Marcus knelt slightly so he could meet her eyes. "Kayla, nothing is more important than you. I'll always be here when you need me." She nodded, her relief evident. "Thanks, Dad." Marcus straightened up, his sharp gaze moving back toward the alley where Jake and his friends had disappeared. "This isn't over. They'll think twice now, but I'm going to make sure they don't come near you or anyone else again." Kayla looked at him, her confidence growing with his unwavering support. "What are you going to do?" Marcus smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What I've always done, take care of the problem." As they walked back to the SUV, Kayla felt safer than she had in days. She knew her father wasn't just going to protect her. He was going to ensure no one else ever had to face what she did. The battle wasn't over, but with Marcus on her side, she finally felt ready to face it. After they returned home, Kayla felt a mix of relief and curiosity. Her father, Marcus, had always been her protector, but she had never seen him so focused, so intense. He was calm, but his sharp movements and deep thinking told her he was already planning something. As Kayla sat at the kitchen table, Marcus paced the room, his phone in hand. He wasn't calling anyone. He was scrolling through contacts, reading notes, and occasionally jotting something down. It was like watching a puzzle being solved in real time. "Dad," Kayla said softly, breaking the silence. "What are you going to do?" Marcus stopped and looked at her. "I'm going to make sure they understand that they can't mess with you, or anyone else." Kayla frowned. "But they'll just come back. They always act like they run the town." Marcus pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his voice calm but firm. "Let me tell you something, Kayla. People like them only act strong because no one stands up to them. The second they realize they're outmatched, they back down. My job is to show them they're outmatched." Kayla hesitated. "You're not going to hurt them, are you?" Marcus shook his head. "That's not how this works. I've spent my life learning how to handle people like them without crossing lines. I'll do what I need to, but trust me, no one's getting hurt unless they force my hand." Kayla nodded, trusting her father. "What can I do?" Marcus gave her a small smile. "First, I want you to stay alert. No more walking alone in quiet places for now. Stick to busy areas and keep your phone on you at all times. Second, I'm going to teach you a few things." "Teach me what?" Kayla asked, curious. Marcus stood and moved to the living room, motioning for her to follow. He cleared some space, setting aside chairs and a coffee table. "Self-defense," he said simply. "Nothing fancy, just enough so you can protect yourself if you ever need to." Kayla hesitated, but Marcus's encouraging smile gave her confidence. "Okay," she said, stepping forward. For the next hour, Marcus taught her simple techniques: how to stay balanced, how to break free if someone grabbed her wrist, and how to use her voice to draw attention. His instructions were clear and patient, and Kayla found herself feeling more confident with each move. "You're a fast learner," Marcus said after they finished. "But the most important thing is this: always stay aware of your surroundings. Trouble usually gives you signs before it shows up. Pay attention to those signs." Kayla nodded, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I'll remember." That night, as Kayla got ready for bed, she felt a new sense of strength. She wasn't just relying on her father to protect her. She was learning to protect herself too. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his office, mapping out his next move. He wasn't just focused on Jake and his gang. He wanted to make sure this didn't happen to anyone else. He contacted a few trusted friends, people who could help him uncover more about the gang and their activities in town. As the clock ticked past midnight, Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with ideas. This wasn't just about protecting Kayla anymore. It was about making sure the town was safe for everyone. And he wasn't going to stop until he succeeded. The next day, Marcus woke up early, his plan clear in his mind. He had spent the night reaching out to a few people who owed him favors. As a former Navy SEAL, Marcus had connections, and he wasn't afraid to use them when it came to protecting his daughter. This wasn't just about Kayla anymore. It was about making a statement to the gang and the town. Kayla watched her father move with purpose as he prepared to leave the house. She couldn't help but feel a mix of worry and pride. "What are you going to do, Dad?" she asked. Marcus paused, looking at her with a reassuring smile. "I'm going to have a little chat with those boys." "Be careful," Kayla said softly. "I will," Marcus promised. "Stay home and keep your phone close. If you need anything, call me." As Marcus left, Kayla sat by the window, her thoughts racing. She trusted her father, but she couldn't help but feel anxious. She had seen how dangerous Jake and his group could be. Still, if anyone could handle them, it was her dad. Marcus drove to a part of town where he knew Jake and his gang liked to hang out. It was an old lot near the edge of the neighborhood, filled with abandoned cars and graffiti-covered walls. He parked his SUV a short distance away and approached on foot, his sharp eyes scanning the area. Sure enough, Jake and his friends were there, laughing and talking loudly. They didn't notice Marcus at first, but when he stepped into their view, the laughter stopped. Jake narrowed his eyes, clearly recognizing Kayla's father. Well, if it isn't the overprotective dad, Jake said with a smirk, trying to sound confident. Marcus stood tall, his voice calm but firm. We need to talk. Jake crossed his arms, his friend standing behind him like a wall of false confidence. Talk about what? Marcus took a step closer, his tone unchanging. About my daughter. About how you've been following her, threatening her, and making her feel unsafe. Jake shrugged, pretending not to care. We were just having fun. No big deal. Marcus's expression hardened. It's a big deal to me. And it stops now. One of Jake's friends, a tall boy with a baseball cap, muttered, Who do you think you are? Marcus's gaze flicked to him, and the boy took a nervous step back. I'm someone who doesn't take kindly to bullies, Marcus said. You think you're tough because no one stood up to you. Well, here I am. Jake tried to keep up his act, but his voice wavered slightly. You can't scare us. Marcus smiled faintly, but it wasn't a friendly smile. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to warn you. If you or any of your friends come near my daughter, or anyone else in this town, you'll regret it. Do you understand? The weight of Marcus's words and his unwavering stare made Jake hesitate. His friends exchanged nervous glances, their bravado fading. Yeah, we get it, Jake finally muttered, his smirk gone. Marcus nodded, satisfied. Good, because next time I won't be this nice. As Marcus turned to leave, he paused and looked over his shoulder. One more thing, if I hear about you bothering anyone else, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows who you really are. Jake said nothing, his confidence completely shattered. Marcus walked back to his SUV, calm and steady, leaving the gang to stew in their own fear. When he returned home, Kayla was waiting by the door. How did it go? She asked. It's handled, Marcus said with a small smile. They won't bother you again. For the first time in days, Kayla felt a sense of relief. She hugged her father tightly, knowing that she could always count on him. Marcus held her close, silently promising that he would always protect her, no matter what. The days following Marcus's confrontation with Jake and his gang were quiet, almost too quiet. Kayla noticed how the usual whispers and stares in the school hallways seemed to vanish. Jake and his friends kept their distance, avoiding her entirely. It was as if they had disappeared from her world altogether. While she was relieved, she couldn't help but wonder what exactly her father had said to them. Marcus, however, wasn't one to let things rest so easily. He knew fear alone wouldn't change people like Jake, and he wanted to ensure the lesson stuck. So Marcus reached out to one of his old Navy friends, someone with connections to local law enforcement. Together, they planned a community meeting about bullying and accountability. That Saturday, Kayla accompanied her father to the town's community center. The room was packed with parents, teachers, students, and even some of Jake's friends, who sat in the back with their arms crossed. Marcus stepped to the front of the room, his calm and commanding presence drawing everyone's attention. Good afternoon, Marcus began, his voice steady. Many of you know me as Kayla's father. I'm here today not just as a parent, but as someone who believes we all have a responsibility to protect each other. He paused, letting his words sink in. A few days ago, my daughter was targeted by a group of boys who thought it was fun to make her feel unsafe. They thought they could intimidate her because they've gotten away with it before. The room was silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Kayla sat in the front row, her heart pounding as her father continued. But let me tell you something, Marcus said, his gaze sweeping the room. This isn't just about my daughter. This is about every child who has ever been made to feel small, scared, or unwelcome. It's about all of us taking a stand against bullying, whether it's in the classroom, the playground, or the streets. He shared stories from his time as a Navy SEAL of missions where teamwork and respect were the only things that kept people alive. Strength doesn't come from tearing others down, he said. It comes from lifting each other up. Kayla watched as heads nodded throughout the room. Even some of Jake's friends seemed to be listening, their defiant postures softening. After the meeting, a few parents approached Marcus, thanking him for speaking out. Kayla noticed Jake's friends quietly slipping out the back door. She felt a mix of pride and relief, knowing her father's words had made an impact. That evening, Kayla and Marcus sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Do you think they'll change?" she asked. Marcus took a deep breath. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but I think they heard what needed to be said. And sometimes that's the first step." Kayla leaned against her father's shoulder, feeling safe and hopeful. "Thank you for everything, Dad." Marcus smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "You're my daughter, Kayla. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you." As the stars began to appear in the sky, Kayla felt a new sense of peace. She knew the challenges weren't over, but with her father by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they had turned fear into strength, proving that standing up for what's right could make a difference, not just for themselves, but for their entire community.